and welcome back. You're watching Witness. Two of Afghanistan's most senior security officials have resigned in the wake of a terrorist attack on the Afghan PA's Jirga last week. Interior Minister Hanif Atmar and National Directorate of Security head Amrullah Saleh resigned on Sunday after ostensibly failing to justify why the terrorist attacks weren't prevented. The Jirga, organized by Afghan President Hamid Karzai, had a high level of security, but despite that, the militants were able to fire several rockets and a suicide squad apparently got within 100 meters of the location. Though no one was killed aside from the suicide bombers, the attacks undermined the event. Both Mr. Atmar and Mr. Saleh were key members of President Karzai's cabinet, and Mr. Saleh in particular was known for his critical views about Pakistan. Were the resignations really the consequence of the failed attacks, or is there more than meets the eye? Well, joining me tonight is well-known journalist Ahmed Rashid, who is the author of Taliban and more recently the very internationally famous Descent into Chaos. Mr. Rashid, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. Did these two resignations take you by surprise? I mean, what kind of impact is it likely to have? Let's start with what's going to happen in Afghanistan now.
Well, I think people in Afghanistan were very shocked because these two were two of the best managers that President Karzai had in his cabinet, and we know that he has suffered from a chronic lack of good management in the cabinet. They were highly respected. Hanif Atmar, as Interior Minister, was reforming the police, something that had not been done in 8 or 9 years, and something that he was doing very efficiently.
Right.
Saleh had built up an intelligence service which was very close to the Americans, the British and NATO, of course, and working very closely with them. So they were. It's been a big shock to the Afghans, and people say it's very demonstrative of President Karzai's very erratic behavior.
And coming right before a general election.
One of the reasons he's clearly got rid of them is that neither of them were particularly keen on talking to the Taliban. Saleh certainly was not keen on talking to the Taliban.
That's right.
And Atmar also had his criticism.
And Mr. Rashid, of course, one of the other important issues that comes up over here is that Mr. Saleh, particularly the intelligence chief, he was considered to be very anti-Pakistan in his views, and he was particularly opposed, as you said, to talking to the Taliban, and in that respect, against talking to Pakistan as well. What should Pakistan be making of this?
Well, you know, certainly the very big difference between the ISI and the NDS of Afghanistan run by Saleh, there were very strong contradictions with the NDS accusing the ISI of continuing to support the Taliban and the Haqqani group and Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. And even though General Pasha, the head of the ISI, and Amrullah Saleh have met several times in Pakistan and in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and they did apparently get on quite well together, but there was a complete lack of trust between the two organizations.
And of course, a muted
I think
response.
Pakistan is probably quite relieved that he's gone. And Saleh, of course, we should remember, was very close to Ahmad Shah Massoud. He is a Tajik, and he's been replaced by a Pashtun who is very close to Karzai.
Right, of course, that the whole Tajik-Pashtun equation figures strongly into this. Do you think Pakistan is ever going to be able to mend fences with the formerly known Northern Alliance, as it was called?
Well, I think the Northern Alliance is very divided, and we saw that in the Jirga, where Dr. Abdullah, the former presidential candidate, did not attend the Jirga, nor did General Dostum, the Uzbek leader.
Right.
But Burhanuddin Rabbani, the former Tajik president, was chairman of the Jirga and seemed to be working very closely with President Karzai. So the Northern Alliance is very divided, and I think so far there has not been sufficient effort by Karzai to win over the Northern Alliance to talk towards the idea of talking to the Taliban. And of course, once you get into that mold, then it's going to be very important that the Pakistanis also try and woo the Northern Alliance in talking to the Taliban.
And of course, Mr. Rashid, there's been a somewhat muted response from Afghanistan's Western allies, particularly NATO and the US, saying that they support Mr. Karzai's decision, but I'm sure there must be some nerves jangling after these two resignations.
I think they would be very nervous, primarily because these were two extremely competent managers, one handling the intelligence, the other handling the police and the interior. So, and they would be very wary of who exactly Karzai is going to appoint in their place. We should remember right now that Karzai has not filled his cabinet. There are 13 members of his cabinet that are still missing since August when the elections were held. And that's because he has not been able to find any substitutes who would be acceptable to Parliament. So the big question is, will the new interior and intelligence chiefs, who have to be cleared by Parliament, actually be cleared by Parliament? And then he has to fill other cabinet posts.
And what kind of impact is this likely to have on militancy in the region? Because, of course, there is a constant movement of militants back and forth across the border. Should Pakistan be preparing for a potential increase in terrorism here at home?
Well, I think certainly, we are expecting any day now the American move into Kandahar, which is going to be a very big operation, and it's going to go on for several months. It's going to be military and economic development and all the rest of it. And I think, in line with that, there's going to be a lot of heavy fighting in southern Afghanistan, in Kandahar, and certainly a lot of fighters have been recruited from inside Afghanistan and from Pakistan to fight in Kandahar. But at the same time, I would think that the Afghan Taliban would want to be happy to see pressure being relieved by the Pakistani Taliban stepping up attacks in Pakistan. So I do think it's going to be a very hot summer on both sides of the border.
Mr. Ahmed Rashid, thank you so much for joining us here tonight in Witness, and of course, as usual, sharing your expert opinion and enlightening us on this issue that we sometimes think doesn't affect us, but it so surely does. Thank you. That, of course, is Mr. Ahmed Rashid, a well-known author and an expert on Afghanistan, and it is going to be crucial to watch, as Mr. Ahmed Rashid said, promises to be a hot summer on both sides of the border. Well, we will, of course, as usual, keep an eye on that. But before we go, coming up next, they promised us the budget would not fuel inflation, but prices of food items are already on the rise. Can the government take corrective measures and fast? We'll find out, but after a short break, so please stay with us.